Chapter 7 Josef. On a train to Hamburg, Germany, 1939. One day from home. The Hitler Youth led Josef down the narrow corridor of the German passenger car. Tears sprang to Josef's eyes. The brown shirt, who'd taken his father away on Kristallnacht, had said, "We'll come for you soon enough." But Josef hadn't waited. He'd gone to them with this stupid stunt. They came to a compartment with a man in a uniform of the Gestapo, the Nazi secret state police, and Josef stumbled. The Gestapo man looked up at them through the window in his door. "No, not here. Not now. Not like this," Josef prayed. And the Hitler Youth boy pushed Josef on past. They came to the door of the Jewish train car, and the Hitler Youth spun Josef around. He glanced over his shoulder to make sure no one was listening. "What were you thinking?" the boy whispered. Josef couldn't speak. The boy thrust the armband at Josef's chest. "Put that on and don't ever do that again," the Hitler Youth told Josef. "Do you understand?" Yes," Josef stammered. Thank you. Thank you. The Hitler Youth breathed hard, his face red, like he was the one in trouble. He spotted the piece of candy Josef had bought Ruth and took it. He stood taller, tugged the bottom of his brown shirt to straighten it, then turned and marched away. Josef slipped back into his compartment, still shaking, and collapsed onto his bench. He stayed there the rest of the trip, his armband securely in place and as visible as possible. He didn't even leave to go to the bathroom. Hours later, the train pulled into Hamburg Central Railway Station. Josef's mother led him and his sister through the crowds to Hamburg docks, where their ship waited for them. Josef had never seen anything so big. If you stood the ship on end, it would have been taller than any building in Berlin. 2 giant tan smokestacks stuck up from the middle of the ship, one of them belching gray-black diesel engine smoke. A steep ramp ran to the top of the tall black hull, and hundreds of people were already on board, milling around under colorful, fluttering pennants and waving to friends and family down on the docks. Flying highest above them all, as if to remind everyone who was in charge, was the red and white Nazi flag with the black swastika in the middle. The ship was called the MS St. Louis. St. Louis was the name of a city in America, Josef had learned. That seemed like a good omen to him, a sign that they would eventually get to America. Maybe one day visit the real St. Louis. A shabby-looking man stumbled out from behind the crates and luggage piled up on the dock, and Ruthie screamed. Josef jumped, and his mother took a frightened step back. The man reached out for them. "You made it, at last!" That voice, thought Josef. Could it really be? The man threw his arms around Mama. She let him hug her, even though she still had her hands across her chest, as if to ward him off. He stepped back and held her at arm's length. "My dearest Rachel," he said, "I thought I'd never see you again." It was him. The shabby man who had lurched from the shadows like an escapee from a mental asylum was Josef's father, Aaron Landau. Josef shuddered. His papa looked nothing like the man who'd been dragged away from their home 6 months ago. His thick brown hair and beard had been shaved off, and his head and face were covered with scraggly stubble. He was thinner, too thin, a skeleton in a threadbare suit 3 sizes too big for him. Aaron Landau's eyes bulged from his gaunt face as he turned to look at his children. Josef's breath caught in his throat, and Ruthie cried out and buried her face in Josef's stomach as their papa pulled the 2 of them into a hug. He smelled so ripe, like the alley behind a butcher shop, that Josef had to turn his head away. "Josef, Ruth, my darlings!" He kissed the tops of their heads again and again, then jumped back. He looked around maniacally, like there were spies everywhere. "We have to go. We can't stay here. We have to get on board before they stop us." "But I have tickets," Mama said. "Visas." Papa shook his head too quickly. It doesn't matter, he said. His eyes looked like they were going to pop out of their sockets. They'll stop us. Take me back. Ruthie clung to her brother. Papa was scaring her. He scared Yosef too. Hurry, Papa said. He pulled the family with him into the stacks of the crates, and Yosef tried to keep up with him as he darted from place to place, dodging imaginary enemies. Yosef gave his mother a frightened glance that said, "What's wrong with Papa?" Mama just shook her head, eyes full of worry. When they got close to the ramp, Papa hunkered down behind the last of the crates. On the count of 3, we make a break for it, he told his family. Don't stop. Don't stop for anything. We have to get on that ship. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3. Yosef wasn't ready. None of them were. They watched as Aaron Landau ran for the ramp, where other passengers had already queued up to hand their tickets to a smiling man in a sailor's uniform. Yosef's father threw himself past the sailor and stumbled onto the ramp's railing before righting himself and sprinting up the gangway. Wait, the sailor cried. Quickly now, children, Mama said. Together they hurried to the ramp as best they could, carrying all the suitcases. I have his ticket, she told the sailor. I'm sorry. We can wait our turn. The startled man at the front of the line motioned for them to go ahead, and Yosef's mother thanked them. My husband is just eager to leave, she told the sailor. He smiled sadly and punched their tickets. I understand. Oh, let me get someone to help you with those bags. Porter? Yosef stood in wonder as another sailor, a German man, without a Star of David armband, a man who wasn't a Jew, put a suitcase under each arm and one in each hand and led them up the gangway. He treated them like real passengers, like real people. And he wasn't the only one. Every sailor they met doffed his cap at them, and the steward who showed them to their cabin assured them they could call upon him for anything they needed while on board, anything at all. Their room was spotless, the bed linens were freshly laundered, and the hand towels were pressed and neatly stacked. It's a trick, Papa said when the door was closed. He glanced around the little cabin like the walls were closing in. They'll come for us soon enough, he said. It was just what the brown shirt had told Yosef. Mama put her hands on Yosef and Ruthie's heads. Why don't you two go on up to the promenade, she said softly. I'll stay here with your father. Yosef and Ruth were only too glad to get away from Papa. A few hours later, they watched from the promenade as tugboats pushed the MS St. Louis away from the dock, and passengers threw confetti and celebrated and blew tearful kisses goodbye. Yosef and his family were on their way to the new country, a new life, but all Yosef could think about was what terrible things must have happened to his father to make him look so awful and act so scared. Chapter 8, Isabel, just outside Havana, Cuba, 1994. Isabel and her grandfather set her Papi in a chair in their little kitchen, and Isabel's mother, Teresa Padron de Fernandez, ran to the cabinet under the sink. Isabel hurried after her. Mommy was very pregnant. She was due in a week's time, so Isabel knelt down to find the iodine. Isabel's father, Geraldo Fernandez, had always been a handsome man, but he didn't look it now. There was blood in his hair, and the area around one of his eyes was already turning black. When they pulled his white linen shirt off him, his back was covered with welts. Isabel watched as Mommy cleaned his cuts with a washcloth. Papi hissed as she disinfected them with iodine. What happened? Isabel's mother asked. An Industrial's baseball game played on the television in the corner, and Isabel's grandfather turned down the volume. There was a riot on the Malation, Lito said. They ran out of food too fast. I can't stay here, Papi said. His head was bent low, but his voice was loud and clear. Not any longer. They'll come for me. Everyone was quiet at that. The only sound was the soft crack of a bat and the roar of the crowd on the television. Papi had already tried to flee Cuba twice. The first time, and he and 3 other men had built a raft and tried to paddle their way to Florida. But a tropical storm turned them back. The second time, his boat had a motor, but he'd been caught by one of the Cuban Navy and had ended up in jail. Now, it was even harder to escape. For decades, the United States had rescued any Cuban refugees they found at sea and taken them to Florida. But the food shortages had driven more and more Cubans to El Norte. Too many. The Americans had a new policy everyone called wet foot, dry foot. If Cuban refugees were caught at sea with wet feet, they were sent to the U.S. naval base at Guantanamo Bay at the southern end of Cuba. From there, they could choose to return to Cuba and Castro or languish in a refugee camp while the United States decided what to do with them. But if they managed to survive the trip across the Straits of Florida and evade the U.S. Coast Guard and actually set foot on the United States soil, be caught with dry feet, they were granted special refugee status and allowed to remain and become U.S. citizens. Poppy was going to run away again, and this time, whether he got caught with wet feet or dry feet, he wasn't coming back. There's no reason to go throwing yourself onto a raft in the ocean, Leto said. You can just lie low for a while. I know a little shack in the cane fields. Things will get better. You'll see. Poppy slammed a fist on the table. And exactly how are they going to get better, Mariano? Do you think the Soviet Union is going to suddenly decide to get back together and start sending us food again? No one is coming to help us, and Castro's only making things worse. As if saying his name made him appear, the baseball game on television was interrupted by a special message from the Cuban president. Fidel Castro was an old man with liver spots on his forehead, gray hair, a big bushy gray beard, and bags under his eyes. He wore the same thing he did every time he was on television, a green military jacket and a round, flat cap, and sat behind a row of microphones. Everyone got quiet as Leto turned up the volume. Castro condemned the violence that had broken out on the Malazon, blaming it on U.S. agents. Poppy scoffed. It wasn't U.S. agents. It was hungry Cubans. Castro rambled on without a script, quoting novels and telling personal anecdotes about the revolution. Oh, turn it off, Poppy said. But before Mommy had reached the set, Castro said something that made them all sit up and listen. We cannot continue guarding the borders of the United States while they send their CIA to instigate riots in Havana. That is when incidents like this occur, and the world calls the Cuban government cruel and inhumane. And so, until there is a speedy and efficient solution, we are suspending all obstacles so that those who wish to leave Cuba may do so legally, once and for all. We will not stand in their way. What did he just say? Mommy asked. Poppy's eyes were wide as he stood from the kitchen table. Castro just said, anybody who wants to leave can leave. Isabel felt as though her heart had been ripped out of her chest. If Castro was letting anyone leave, her father would be gone before the sun rose the next day. She could see it in his wild look. You can't go now, Poppy, Leto said. You have a family to take care of, a wife, a daughter, a son on the way. Isabel's father and grandfather yelled at each other about dictators and freedom and families and responsibility. Leto was her mother's father, and he and Poppy had never gotten along. Isabel covered her ears and stepped away. She had to think of some answer to all of this, some solution that would keep her family together. Then she had it. We'll all go, Isabel cried. That shut everybody up. Even Castro stopped talking, and the TV went back to showing the baseball game. No, Poppy and Leto said at the same time. Why not? Isabel said. Your mother is pregnant, for one thing, Leto said. There's no food to feed the baby here anyway, Isabel said. There's no food for any of us, and no money to buy it with if there was. But there is food in the States, and freedom and work, and a place where her father wouldn't be beaten or arrested or run away. We'll all go, while Castro was letting people out, she went on. Leto, too. What? But no, Leto protested. They were all quiet a moment more until her father said, But I don't even have a boat. Isabel nodded. She could fix that too. Without saying anything, Isabel ran next door to the Castillo's house, Luis, the older boy who'd saved her from the policeman's nightstick, wasn't home from work yet, and neither was his mother, Juanita, who worked at the cooperative law office. But Isabel found Ivan and his father, Rudy, right where she thought they'd be, working on the boat in their shed. It was an ugly blue thing cobbled together out of old metal advertisements and road signs and oil drums. It barely qualified as a boat, but it was big enough for the 4 Castillos and maybe 4 more guests. Well, if it isn't Hurricane Isabel, Senor Castillo said. He had white hair that he wore swept back on his head, and even though there was no food, he had a middle-aged paunch to his belly. You have to take us with you, Isabel said. No, we don't, Senor Castillo said. Ivan, nail. People are rioting in Havana, Isabel said. Tell me something I don't know, Senor Castillo said. Ivan, nail. Ivan handed him another nail. My father was almost arrested, Isabel said. If you don't take us with you, they'll throw him in prison. Senor Castillo paused his hammering for a moment, then shook his head. There's no room, and we don't need a fugitive on board. Ivan looked at him funny, but only Isabel saw it. Please, Isabel begged. We don't have any gasoline anyway, Ivan said. He put a hand to the motorcycle motor they'd mounted inside the boat. We're not going anywhere soon. I can fix that, Isabel said. She ran home again. Her father and grandfather were still arguing in the kitchen, so she slipped in the back way, grabbed her trumpet, gave it one long, sad look, ran out the back door. She was already in the street when she stopped, ran to her backyard, and snatched up the little mewling kitten, too. With the trumpet in one arm and the kitten in the other, she ran the few blocks to the beach, where she banged on the door of a fisherman her grandfather knew. His gas-powered fishing boat rocked gently at a little pier nearby. The fisherman came to his door, licking his fingers and frowning. Isabel had caught him at dinner. Fried fish, it smelled like. The kitten's nose sniffed eagerly at the air, and it meowed. Isabel's stomach growled. You're Mariano Padron's granddaughter, aren't you? The fisherman said. What do you want? I need gasoline, Isabel told him. Is that so? Well, I need money. I don't have any money, Isabel said, but I have this. She held out the trumpet. Isabel regretted that its brass was a little tarnished, but it was the most valuable thing she owned. The fisherman had to take it in trade. What am I going to do with that? He asked. Sell it, Isabel told him. It's French and old, plays like a dream. The fisherman sighed. And why do you need gasoline so badly? To leave Cuba before my father is arrested. The fisherman wiped his lips on the back of his hand. Isabel stood for what seemed like hours, her insides churning like a waterspout. At last, he reached out and took the trumpet. Wait here, he told her. Isabel held her breath, and soon the fisherman came back with 2 enormous plastic jugs of gasoline. Each one came up to Isabel's chest. Is that enough? Isabel asked. To get you to Miami, yes? And back again. Isabel's heart soared. She hopped up and down. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, Isabel told him. Oh, and you have to take the little kitten, too. She held the wiggling creature out to him, but the old fisherman stared at it. Is that so? The fisherman said. Please, Isabel said, or else someone will catch her and eat her. But you have fish to eat. She can eat the scraps. The fisherman eyed the cat suspiciously. Is it a good mouser? Yes, Isabel said, though she was sure that even a mouse would give the scrawny thing trouble. Her name is Leona. The old fisherman sighed and took the squirming kitten from her. Isabel smiled, then noticed how big and heavy the gas cans were. Oh, and I also need you to help me carry these back. Chapter 9, Mahmoud, Aleppo, Syria, 2015. Through the huge hole that used to be the wall of his apartment, Mahmoud saw gray-white clouds from the missile strikes blooming all around. He shook his head, trying to clear the ringing, and spied his little brother. Walid was sitting right where he had been before the attack, on the floor in front of the TV. Only the TV wasn't there anymore. It had fallen 5 stories to the ground below, along with the outside wall, and Walid was centimeters from joining them both. Walid, don't move, Mahmoud cried. He hurried across the room, his ankles turning painfully on broken bits of wall. Walid sat still as a statue, and he looked like one too. He was covered with a fine gray powder from head to foot, like he'd taken a bath in dry concrete mix. Mahmoud finally reached him, snatching him up and away from the cliff's edge that used to be their wall. Walid, Walid, are you okay? Mahmoud asked, turning him around. Walid's eyes were alive, but empty. Walid, talk to me. Are you all right? Walid finally looked up at him. You are bleeding, was all he said. Mahmoud? Walid? Their mother cried. She staggered to the door of her bedroom, Hannah crying in her arms. Oh, thank God you're alive, their mom said. She dropped to her knees and pulled them both into a hug. Mahmoud's heart was racing. His ears still buzzed, and his shoulder burned, but they were all alive. He felt tears come to his eyes and wiped them away. The floor beneath their feet groaned and shifted. We have to get out of here, Mahmoud's mother said, putting Hannah in Mahmoud's arms. Go, go, take your brother and your sister. I'll be right behind you. I just have to grab a few things. Mom, no. Go, she told Mahmoud, pushing them all toward the door. Mahmoud clutched Hannah with one arm and took his brother's hand. He dragged Walid with him toward the front door, but Walid pulled back. What about my action figures? Walid asked. He looked over his shoulder like he wanted to go back for them. We'll buy new ones, Mahmoud told him. We have to get out of here. Across the hall, the Saraf family filled the corridor. Mother, father, and twin daughters, both younger than Walid. What's happened, Mr. Saraf? Asked Mahmoud. And then he saw the missing wall, and his eyes went wide. The building's been hit, Mahmoud said. We have to get out. Mr. and Mrs. Saraf hurried back into their apartment, and Mahmoud carried Hannah down the stairs, pulling Walid behind them. Halfway to the ground, the building shifted again, and the concrete stairs broke away from the wall, leaving a 5-centimeter crack. Mahmoud grabbed the railing to steady himself and waited a long, breathless moment to see if the stairs were going to collapse. When they didn't, he ran the rest of the way down and burst out onto the street, Hannah still in his arms and his brother right behind them. Rubble was strewn everywhere. Missiles and bombs thudded nearby, close enough to shake loose parts of walls. A building shuddered and collapsed, smoke and debris avalanching out into the street. Mahmoud jumped when it fell, but Walid stood still, like this kind of thing happened every day. With a jolt of surprise, Mahmoud realized this kind of thing did happen every day, just not to them, until now. Everywhere around them, people fled into the streets, covered in gray dust and blood. No sirens rang, no ambulances came to help the wounded, no police cars or emergency crews hurried to the scene. There weren't any left. Mahmoud stared up at their building. The whole front had collapsed, and Mahmoud felt like he was looking into a giant dollhouse. Each floor had a living room and a kitchen, just like theirs, all decorated differently. The building groaned again, and the kitchen on the top floor began to tip toward the street. It collapsed onto the 6th floor, and then into Mahmoud's apartment, and on down like dominoes. Mahmoud barely had time to yell, "Run!" and drag Walid and his sister away before the whole building came crashing down into the street, thundering like a fighter jet. Safe on the sidewalk across the street, clutching Hannah and Walid, Mahmoud suddenly realized his mother had still been in the building. "Mom! Mom!" Mahmoud yelled. "Mahmoud? Walid?" He heard his mother cry, and she came out from behind up the pile of rubble with the Saraf family, all of them covered in gray dust. She ran toward Mahmoud and embraced him, Walid and Hannah. "We went out the back stairs," she told them, "and just in time." Mahmoud looked up at where his apartment had been. It wasn't there anymore. His home was totally destroyed. What would they do now? Where would they go? Mahmoud's mother was carrying their school backpacks, and she traded them for Hannah. Mahmoud couldn't understand why his mother had bothered to save their backpacks until he saw that they were stuffed with clothes and diapers. She had gone back for whatever she could take from the apartment. Everything they owned was in these 2 backpacks. I can't reach your father, Mahmoud's mother said, thumbing her phone. There's no service again. Mahmoud's father was an engineer with a mobile phone company. If the phones were out, he was probably working on trying to fix them. But what if his father had been hit by one of the bombs? Mahmoud's stomach twisted into knots just thinking about it. But then there his dad was, running down the street toward them, and Mahmoud felt like he could fly. Fatima, Mahmoud, Walid, Hannah, his father cried. He wrapped them all in a hug and kissed little Hannah on the forehead. Thank God you're all alive, he cried. Dad, our house is gone, Mahmoud told him. What do we do? What we should have done a long time ago. We're leaving Aleppo. Now. I parked the car nearby. We can be in Turkey by tomorrow. We can sell the car there and make our way north to Germany. Everyone stopped while Mahmoud's father walked ahead. Germany, Mahmoud's mother said. Mahmoud felt as stunned as his mother sounded. Germany? He remembered the map of the world that hung in his classroom. Germany was somewhere up north in the heart of Europe. He couldn't imagine traveling that far. Just for a little while, Mahmoud's father said. I saw on the TV they're accepting refugees. We can stay there until this is all over, until we can come back home. It's cold in Germany, Mahmoud said. Do you want to build a snowman? His father sang. They had seen Frozen in a movie theater back when they could get to the now government-controlled side of the city that had theaters. Yusuf, Mohammed's mom, warned. Mahmoud's dad looked sheepish. It doesn't have to be a snowman. This is serious, Mom said. I know we've been talking about leaving, but now, like this, we were going to pack, plan, buy tickets, book hotel rooms. All we have now are 2 backpacks and our phones. Germany is a long way away. How will we get there? By car first, Mahmoud's father shrugged. Then by boat? By train? By bus? On foot? I don't know. What choice do we have? Our home is destroyed. Were you able to get the cash we put away? Mahmoud's mother nodded, but she was clearly still worried. So we have money. We will buy tickets as we go. More importantly, we have our lives. But if we stay in Aleppo a day longer, we may not even have that. Mahmoud's father looked from his wife to Hannah, to Mahmoud, to Walid. We've spent too much time talking about it and not doing anything. It's not safe here. It hasn't been for months. Years. We should have gone long ago. Ready or not, if we want to live, we have to leave Syria.